All right, welcome to Card Knock Life Plays. We are going to do a short one today. I couldn't pass up this deck list. Mono blue, Paradoxical Outcome. Now, I by no means am the expert on this one, but we're going to stumble through it a little bit and figure out how the heck this thing works. Posted in a 5-0 finish just the other day online. Tulio Jowdy finished with this mono blue deck that basically wins off of the back of Aetherflux Reservoir going off via cards like, let's see, where is it in here? Inspiring Statuary, powering out things like Paradoxical Outcome, which is going to net you a bunch of card draw, return all your Ornithopters and all your Bone Saws and all your 1-mana artifacts to your hand, draw you a bunch of cards, and then to be recast, gain a bunch of life with the Reservoir, and then just dome them for 50. It seems crazy, but it actually works. In the few games that I've played with it, it actually works. Now, the hardest part about this deck, which I am the least versed in, is the sideboarding aspect of it, as you will see. He's got some kind of interesting sideboard plans going on that are quite tricky to kind of throw in, because when you're met with hate for this kind of deck, particularly negates and things like that, you've got to be prepared to cut some pieces of your combo and your engine in order to make sure that you can make sure that you're able to still go off. But that's going to make you less efficient, so that's kind of tough to do. So we're going to do a little bit of playing with that deck, but first of all, I want to go over the basic engine of it. I've got it built here on Moto. We're looking at a really simple looking deck. I've only got 2 rows of cards here because we've got a lot of 4-ofs. But Bone Saw basically is played purely because it is a 0-mana artifact. So that's an easy one to return and recast. Now, Inspiring Statuary is great and all, but it only gives non-artifact spells you control improvise. Excuse me, I'm getting a phone call there. And so when you're playing artifacts, you've got to be casting your blue mana, or using your blue mana to cast them. So things like Renegade Map and Implement of Improvement are not actually like just straight up free with this card. So you are taxed on the amount of blue mana you've got, which is the limiting factor here. Bone Saw and Ornithopter don't have that limit. Another additional option here is to put the Bone Saw on an Ornithopter, and then you can actually block flyers. So, like, worst case scenario, you can get in there and block flyers or even attack, which is probably not relevant at all because you're going to be doing all 20 damage with your Ornithopter or a Glint-Nest Crane. Now, the only other creature we run in this deck is Glint-Nest Crane. Glint-Nest Crane does a great job of searching your deck for the cards that are combo pieces, like Aetherflux Reservoir, Inspiring Statuary, or sometimes you just need to grab like an Ornithopter or Bone Saw to complete your engine. Implement of Improvement's a weird one because it does have a white mana cost in its card, in its activation cost, I should say, white mana symbol. And what it does is, first of all, the 2 life might just be the last 2 life you need to deal 50 to them with Aetherflux Reservoir. Probably not, but that's a little bit of a corner case. More importantly, when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card. Now, sometimes you need to dig for that last piece, and this is the card to do it. You only run 2 of them, so it's not a huge factor, but you can get the white mana off of a Prophetic Prism and then dig with Implement of Improvement, and that really is the only way you can get that white mana. Okay. Not to mention, it is a 1-costed artifact, which is incentive enough to run it. Same with Renegade Map, one that is 1-costed, but also searches for an island, also has some kind of backup function beyond that. When we're running only 18 lands in this deck, we might want to have access to extra islands, and Renegade Map provides like the perfect opportunity to find them. Alright, on to the non-artifact cards in the deck. We talked about Aetherflux Reservoir. Obviously, this is our main piece of our deck here. I guess I'll mention real quick. When I read this card at first, I thought it was you gain a life each time you cast a spell this turn, but it says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. So it really adds up fast. It's exponential. So like Baral's Expertise, for example, when you cast Baral's Expertise, you may also cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. You can play Baral's, put the Reservoir into play, and that's already 2 spells that you've cast this turn. So you're starting off your count at 3 with your next spell. So that's kind of nice. And that's a really good way to start off your engine if you do happen upon those 2 pieces of the puzzle. That's another reason we run more Baral's Expertise in the board. Now, his list had 4 Barals between the main and the board, and I just had the 3. That's the only change I have made. I don't have the 4th Baral's Expertise in the sideboard. Perhaps I should have it. I replaced that with another Dispel. Now, actually the non-artifact cards. Engulf the Shores is a pretty necessary evil for us to play against creature decks. We need to buy time because we do functionally and basically nothing to stop their attack for a really long time. Engulf the Shores will put them back a few turns and is a card that we can cast for 1 blue mana with an Inspiring Statuary in play, improvising, 3 artifacts. Paradoxical Outcome, the namesake of the deck, basically is what allows us to go off. Perhaps this should be called an Aetherflux Reservoir deck because that's really the win condition, but Paradoxical Outcome is really the way that this deck functions. And in order to find the Aetherflux Reservoir, we're going to really have to have a Paradoxical Outcome. And in order to gain all the life, we're going to have a Paradoxical Outcome. This card draws a card for each card you return to your hand. Each one of your permanents you return to your hand. So you're basically going to want to bounce all of your artifacts aside from your Inspiring Statuary whenever you cast it. Now, when you bounce your Ornithopter and Bonesaw, that's a free draw spell. If you're a vintage player, you're familiar with this, with the Moxen. This is a pretty impressive card in this deck. Baral's Expertise, another card that is going to clear up the board and buy us some time, just like Engulf the Shores does, but also doesn't set us back when we cast it because it can get us an Aetherflux Reservoir and Inspiring Statuary off of the second portion of the card. That puts allows us to cast a 4 or less card. Now, the cool thing about this is this will let us put an Aetherflux Reservoir into play off of an Inspiring Statuary for 2 mana without having to worry about the fact that this is an artifact. I mean, obviously we can't improvise this artifact into play. You can improvise the Baral's Expertise into play. Reverse Engineering. Finally, we've got a cool place for Reverse Engineering. We've got that cool promo coming up if you want to build this deck in paper. That F&M promo, Reverse Engineering, has a home here. This card already has Improvise, so you don't need the Statuary, but this obviously is just a great way to dig for that spell. For any one of those spells in your combo. But it can be cast as early as turn 2 if you play like a turn 1 Renegade Map, turn 2 Ornithopter Bonesaw, and Island. You can be drawing 3 cards on turn 2, which is pretty impressive. So obviously we're going to run 4 of those. Whir of Invention, pretty explanatory. This finds our pieces of our puzzle. Notably, this is an instant, so if we're going to hold back for like an Engulf the Shores, like we may need that to survive this last turn. And it turns out that we're going to be at 1 life. We're going to Whir of Invention instead. We're going to grab an Aetherflux Reservoir and we're going to go off next turn. So the instant speed is really like the biggest draw to this card, and it's almost worth paying an extra blue mana or an extra mana for the same kind of effect for the fact that it's instant. If you're playing and you're boarding in a lot of your counter spells and things like that, having access to like negates and things like that to stop like some really backbreaking cards, and then going, well, if I can manage to tolerate whatever my opponent's casting, I'd rather go off next turn. Whir of Invention is a great EOT play for you, but you still have the option of holding your mana to stop all of the problem cards first. All right, looking at our sideboard. Basically, we've just got a lot of counter magic because people are going to be trying to stop our plan. Commit to Memory is a good catch-all. Put target spell or non-land permanent on into its owner's library second from the top, but it's also a good way to filter a lot of your mana into some major card draw in the memory portion. Vexing Scuttler is kind of the weird one here. You do get a lot of mana, and you can also Inspiring Statuary this guy into play to return like a Paradoxical Outcome or an Engulf the Shores or some kind of big splashy spell with him to your hand. So he is not a flash creature, so don't get him confused with Elder Deep Fiend and accidentally try to play him on your opponent's turn. But he is one that can be cast off of the Improvise. The rest of them, again, pretty self-explanatory. Dispel, Negate, and Metallic Rebuke. Obviously all counter spells to help us make sure that our plan is going to go off. More Engulf the Shores, more Baral's Expertise. Against aggressive creature decks, we're going to need those. All right, so we're going to give this a shot. We're going to try it in a couple of queues. No promises that I'm going to make the right plays all the time, but don't laugh at me too much when I don't. I've played it a couple times, and the deck seems pretty powerful if it happens to draw the right pieces. And I guess sometimes it does, because this guy did it 5 times in a row and won a league with it. So thanks for watching and enjoy.